Hello, welcome back. I'm Johnny Lyle, and welcome to Red Dot Email Marketing Dull Stuff, Part 2. So this is the rest of the dull bits of email marketing you just have to get right. Now, I know this is dull, but the effort you put in here will be rewarded with better results at the other end. So please stick with me. There's not a long one, this one. It's only another 10 minutes or so. And we're going to go through some bits that really matter to actually make sure you can get your emails delivered. So the first thing we're going to look at is working within the law. Now, every country has a different set of rules to work to. But what's important to note is they're changing. The consumer is becoming more protected and harder to target. It's why we have to be really aware of the laws when we're changing, when we're emailing. Now, business users are often easier to reach, and they do tend to work with a different set of rules. But again, this is changing a little bit in some of the markets. So the big one that most of you will need to be aware of is CanSpam in the USA. If you are mailing into the USA, you have to be very, very aware of this. In the USA, all email marketing is controlled by the CanSpam Act. Okay? CanSpam stands for Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography in Marketing. Email marketing is considered so bad that it is lumped in the same way as and treated in the same way as pornography. So you have to be very, very careful. It is like sending pornography to... They treat it the same as sending pornography to everyone in your email list. So that's why you have to be so careful. In the UK, it's slightly different. You can email businesses, but not individuals. But again, the thing to be really aware of is that as a sole trader, i.e. if you're just a single person working from home or with a single office, you could be considered as an individual. So if you're mailing these people again, you need to tread a little carefully. And there's also massive changes coming in the data laws in the UK, which means it has an impact on the way that we hold data, so you need to be aware of these too. So that's the scary bit, but once we've got that in our head, the good news is the panic's over, because the rules within CanSpam and within the UK are pretty good. They just follow good practice. So if you work within good practice that I'm going to go over now, you'll pretty much be able to comply with CanSpam. So there's nothing to worry about as long as you're not just doing stupid sending 1 million emails a day. If you're doing that, then you deserve to fall foul of CanSpam anyway. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about new business development, growing your database, growing your customer base by using email marketing. That's what we're doing here. If you want to learn about spamming, we're not the place to do it. So let's look at what good practice is. Let's look at what CanSpam says that you can and can't do. Now, the first one is you can't use false or misleading sender information. So again, that's just really obviously good practice. If you sent an email out and it claimed it was from the Queen of England, that would pretty much obviously be misleading and considered as phishing or considered as spam. That would be a really easy one to identify as breaking the rules. So you see a lot of those obvious phishing ones that are saying they're from a bank. They are not. They're from someone who's masking their sender information. Don't use deliberately misleading headlines. Again, real common sense. So if you tell everyone who opens that email that they'll win $1 million, it's almost certainly misleading unless you're a huge rich person who wants to give $1 million to everyone who opens the email. It's very unlikely. So again, you can't claim something that's absolutely untrue. Now, this isn't for everyone, but you need to show an address of the sender. You need to allow people to be able to contact you. You can do that behind a postal address or post office address or post box address, whatever it might be. But you do need to legally, in the US, to mail into the US, you need to show an address of the sender. You need to tell the recipient where you're based, and you need to show an actual office or sender address. That's not for everyone, but when I've done this with websites, where I've had websites before where we didn't show an address, sales are really poor, and actually people trust you if you put your email address on there. But if we're talking about slow growth, slow burn, actually building a customer base, why wouldn't you want to send them or show them where you're based so they can actually see that you're a proper bricks and mortar business as well? This is another really obvious one. Have an easy unsubscribe option. Not everyone does it. I just don't understand. I don't understand why you'd want people. Why would you want to mail people who are clearly not interested in your services? So make it easy for people to unsubscribe. You can ask people to log in and change preferences and make it difficult, but that isn't really within the rules, so I would avoid doing that. For me, a single button where you can just press it to unsubscribe. Single unsubscribe is really simple, or just reply with stop if you're not using one of those systems and you're mailing from your own Outlook or something, then just reply with stop. It's far simpler and well within the rules. And that leads on to the next one, which is when someone unsubscribes, get them off your list quickly. You really don't want to keep them on there. They're not happy with you, or they're not interested in your product, so get them off your list quickly. a lot of the big automated mails, and actually Sport Pursuit, who I used in the last one as being a simple system, most of theirs will be planned a week ahead. And I would say taking someone off within a week would be reasonable. Much longer than that, and it could start to get a little bit more awkward. I think you would start to potentially fall foul of the rules then. And then this last point, I'm not sure about this one. You need to apparently make it clear it's an advertising or marketing message. Well, it's pretty obvious it's a marketing message, but what you're not going to do is have this is an advertisement, which is almost what they're trying to claim you need to do in your subject line, and that would just look ridiculous. So I would avoid that one. As long as it is clear that it's a marketing message, you could even put that at the bottom. This is a marketing message brought to you by newbizsales.com, based at, and then show the address at the bottom. That would easily fall within the rules. You'd be fine doing that. So something like that is a way around it. Just I wouldn't put it in the header, because obviously you won't get any sales or won't get any interest if it says this is an advertisement in the header. So the final one here is that it is your responsibility to comply. Absolutely and utterly, you cannot hide behind a third-party sender. So if you ask an agency or a third-party sender to act on your behalf and you get them to break the rules, that is not an excuse. It is you that is liable. They will be as well, they'll be fined as well, but it's you that's liable, so you can't hide behind a third party. If you're sending out to people, whoever you're using, it's your responsibility to comply. We've seen how easy it is to comply, so you don't need to break the rules. So I would stick to them absolutely rigidly. Now, the next little bit we're going to look at is how to keep track of whether your domains are safe and whether you're actually getting the deliverability you need. So the simplest check for the state of your domain is your email delivery rate. And then, again, that's all quite obvious stuff, isn't it? So, and that depends on your sender reputation, which is why tests like Mail Tester are so useful and why I do sort of rely on them a little bit. If you're in any doubt about your deliverability, then it is worth actually just a quick run through that tester, see whether there's anything on there you need to be aware of, and you can try and sort out, or maybe that shows you the time to move on. Now, there are four main things that affect your sender reputation, which again is the safety and quality of your domain. So these are the four things we need to look for. Whether you're getting a high bounce rate, we're going to cover all these in more detail over the next few slides. Whether you're getting spam complaints, whether you're falling foul and mailing spam traps, which are the bane of our life, and the volume of mails you send. So we're going to look at each of these briefly on the next few slides. There's nothing complicated about any of this stuff, but it's really important to get it right as well and try and avoid falling into any of these mistakes. So the first one is high bounce rate problems. Now, a high bounce rate is the single biggest factor in identifying spam emails. I've seen this so many times, and again, I've probably made that mistake in the past with some data I bought previously. So there's two types of bounces, hard bounces and soft bounces. Each have their own little wrinkles that you need to understand. A hard bounce is the biggest problem. So it's a mailing address or even a whole domain that no longer exists, and that then means the email that you're trying to send is rejected by the server at the recipient end. So lots of people, if they're using a Gmail or a Hotmail or one of those types of email addresses who are getting too many spam emails, they just give up and walk away. It's better now, I suppose, because some of the filters pick them out, but certainly lots of people just walk away from emails, and they might change it to rather than Johnny.Lyle, they might change it to J.Lyle. So they or just J.Lyle, or one word, or J_Lyle, whatever it might be, to actually start again. And some of those email addresses, particularly the ones run by Hotmail and Gmail and the like, will be converted into spam traps, into the dreaded spam traps, which you're going to go on to in a sec. But those hard bounces, you can't even see them necessarily when they're going into spam traps. But hard bounces are really awkward, really difficult. You need to work very hard to remove, to keep them out of your life. Soft bounces are less evil, but they still show that an email box is full or has a temporary problem. So it's an early indicator that things could get a lot worse in the days and weeks to come. So if you've got soft bounces, you need to get them off again, get them checked, get them out of your life as quickly as possible. So you need to do everything you can to get your bounce rate down and keep it down. As this, if you have to move a domain, kill a domain, scrap a domain, move on, that means that you're having to do that because your bounce rate has gone nearly every single time. So if it happens, you need to move on and start again. And obviously there's a bit of hassle in that, so you could avoid doing it. So we're going to look now at spam complaints. So this is becoming very, very easy for a customer or a recipient to mark it as spam. Every major email client has it as standard. Again, I use an Apple Mac, and there's a single button now that I can just chuck it straight, mark it as spam, chuck it straight in the spam box. So it's worth staying on top of this. We need to make sure that what we're sending is good, because if we send good emails that are likely to be received by the right people, it's much less likely to be marked as spam. Whereas if you're sending huge numbers of emails to the wrong type of audience, they're going to say, well, that's not really relevant to me, because spam is only really a completely irrelevant email. If it's got some relevance to people, they won't mark it as spam. And the more people who mark it as spam, the more this information is shared amongst the ISPs, and the information about your domain is aggregated. So it's all brought together. And then when they all look at it and they say, well, this is spamming, oh yeah, he's spamming, this affects your ability to deliver to any other email box. And as I said at the start, it could, if you're using it from your main domain, it could really affect your overall domain as well. So one really easy way to minimize hitting these sort of spam complaints is to avoid mailing any generic email addresses ever. So I've got a business that sells email data, and I just took 55,000 generic email addresses out recently, because just you cannot mail them. So that means info at, sales at, marketing at, support at, and definitely not spam at. I actually honestly saw spam at as being an email address for sale the other day. Why would you want to mail spam at anywhere? Because it's clearly not a customer who wants to buy from you. So there might be different ones. There's different language versions of what your generic emails are, obviously. But go through, if you hold the information on these, unless they're a customer you're dealing with all the time, take those generic email things out of your email list, because they're by far the most likely to be marked as spam if you mail to them. Now, spam traps I mentioned before, these are a massive problem, and why getting your data right is so critical. These are fake or lapsed email addresses. The Gmail and the people at Google, they set them as traps to get people like us. And what effectively they are outdated. They show if you're using outdated or sort of bought email lists. They're a nasty piece of work. So these email addresses are no longer meant to receive any emails at all, which is why they're so critical, because they shouldn't be getting any. And if you do actually mail them, then it shows the email providers that you're a potential spammer, because you're using probably very old data. That's what they really don't like. And it's one of the biggest risks in any bought email address list, as it's a strong signal you're sending unsolicited mail to huge numbers of people. Now, there are lots of lists. There's lots of good lists, lots of bad lists. And when I look at lists these days, and I do look at quite a lot of email lists, and I'm going to cover that in one of the lessons shortly. But when I do look at these lists, some of them are absolutely dreadful. They're so obviously, there's ones even with my own email address from 10 years ago, so I know full well that is a very old list. So that's always a good place to start if you're checking. The bad thing about spam traps is there's no tools. We have got no tools to try and identify, to clean, or to try and sniff them out. If it goes into a spam trap, then it is marked as, or potentially marked as a spammer. So I've got email test tools, I've got all sorts of tools to try and test them, and it still can't spot them. So what happens is sort of the email is received as normal, so it will show as being delivered. It probably won't be shown as opened, but it will be shown as being delivered. But when they're received, they set off the equivalent of a silent alarm to the email provider. So it's the same as if someone breaks into a bank and they've got the button underneath. It won't ring in the bank, but it will ring somewhere else and be telling someone that you're potentially a spammy email. And it's why you need to work hard to create this great list. And I keep going on about it, but send better emails to few rather than dangerous spammy emails to hundreds. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work in my mind, and it's unethical. But if you're about to move on from an existing dirty domain, this is me being slightly naughty, there's almost no harm in giving it one last use push to see if there's any value in a block of rough and ready data you hold. So if you've got 1,000 lines of data, you can either ring them all up and see, we can just let's blast it. So you can give it a good blast and see whether it works or not. It might be worth just a quick check to see whether you get some out of offices or see what you get from it anyway. So, but if you're about to move on from a scrap domain. Now, mailing volume is the other one as well. So if you mail hundreds and thousands of people at a time, you're taking bigger risks. And again, it's pretty obvious that if you're a spammer, you're more likely to mail thousands of people at a time and maybe even thousands of times a week. So being gentler will produce better results. So rather than send 500 emails in one go, which again is a clear indicator that you're pushing very hard, it's much more effective to send blocks of 20 emails max and send them during the working day for that particular market. So if you're in the UK, the timings will obviously be different. If you're mailing into Australia, the timings will be different. So now I read a piece yesterday which was really interesting, where someone in our industry suggested you should never send to more than 4 people at a time. And I thought, why 4 people? Why 4 people? And his explanation was that It makes the email look like a nice, sensible business email to a recipient and a few colleagues that have been CC'd in. And it looks much more like that than an outbound prospecting email. It might be a little bit naughty, but it's certainly one of the ways you can do it. But whatever you choose, sending it less and sending fewer better emails is a far better way and far more sustainable solution than just blasting out with hundreds and hundreds and thousands of poor quality emails at a time and hoping for the best. But for me, that's it. That's really the dull stuff done. It's a case of being really sensible, not trying to kill yourself, not mailing thousands of people. And before you do the interesting stuff, you just have to get this dull stuff right. You just have to understand this dull stuff, I'm afraid. So you need to make sure you understand the specific laws in your country. So have a quick read of CanSpam, or look just for a summary of CanSpam, just to make sure you're on the right side of it. If you're in any doubt, go back over those slides and see what the sort of like 4 or 5 or 6 bits are you really need to understand. If you get it wrong, it could be a very expensive mistake if you don't find out the laws. Some of the fines that are being bandied around for mailing are incredible, so just make sure you understand the risks, but also by doing that you'll understand the opportunities in the country in which you operate, so you'll actually see who you can mail and how hard you can mail them. And then avoid those 4 main risks of getting yourself marked as a spammer, and they are good practice. That's all there is to it. Each of these ones here is very sensible, very good practice. So these 4 ones we need to avoid is the high bounce rate, hard bounces, soft bounces. If you get them, get rid of them. Try and get them off as quickly as possible. Spam complaints, very easy to get, very hard to get rid of, so make sure you're really, really on top of that. Trying to mail to people who are likely to want to receive it. Mailing the wrong stuff to the wrong people is how you get spam complaints. Spam traps, the dreaded spam traps, no way of knowing whether you've hit one or not other than be very careful about the data you're buying or data you're importing into your system. And if you are doing that, keep it miles away from your main domain so you don't risk it. And then the last one there is about the volume of mails you're sending. So just be ultra careful about the volume of mails you're sending and trial it. Trial, test, optimize, repeat. Trial, test, optimize, repeat. So that's it for part 2. I promise you the next bits will be a bit more interesting. That's the dull stuff done. But if you get the dull stuff right, it's the equivalent of actually prepping a room for decoration or prepping a car for paint. The more effort you put into prepping it, the more effort you put into getting these bits right, the better the rewards will be at the other end. So get all these bits right before you move on to the next one. If you're in any doubt, just flick back and have a look at some of these other bits, particularly those sort of like 4 here that you need to be really aware of. Have a quick look at the CanSpam rules as well and make sure you understand what they are. My advice would probably be, if you're not really sure, just make sure you comply with CanSpam, and then you'll probably be alright for pretty much any market in the world. So that's the one I tend to work for. So CanSpam seems to have those, but the good thing is the rules within CanSpam actually are good practice as well. So we will see you in the next part. Hope you've enjoyed that, or at least managed to endure it, because it's the dull stuff. I'm Johnny Lyle, and I will see you soon. Thank you very much.